The stars burned cold against the darkness of space as Captain Lee Dongmin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit, watching the last survivors flee from Kepler Station. Admiral Hyunwoo's voice crackled through the comm system, filled with static and desperation as evacuation ships launched from the dying station, while pieces of destroyed warships floated like metal graves around them. 3 years had passed since the Voidborn first appeared at the edge of known space, and every major fleet in the galaxy had fallen to their advance with tactics that seemed impossible to counter. The Altarian Empire, with their proud golden ships, had lasted 6 days before their entire armada was consumed by the dark vessels that moved like living shadows through space. The Nexus Collective, with technology so advanced it seemed like magic, had managed 8 days of resistance before their quantum weaponry proved useless against an enemy that adapted faster than they could fire. Even the warrior clans of Drakmor, who had never known defeat in 10,000 years of conquest, had been broken in a single battle that lasted less than 3 hours. Lieutenant Commander Park So-young turned from her tactical station with data that made Dongmin's blood run cold as she reported that 17 more systems had gone dark in the past week. Each fallen world meant billions of lives lost, and entire civilizations erased from existence, while the Voidborn grew stronger with every victory they claimed. Engineer Kim Tai-ho worked frantically at his console, trying to understand the strange readings coming from the wreckage around them, as pieces of alien technology fused with human metal in ways that defied physics. Dr. Choi Min-ae studied samples of Voidborn material that had been recovered from battle sites, and her findings suggested these invaders were not just advanced aliens but something far more terrifying. The enemy ships appeared to be living creatures that could absorb and integrate any technology they encountered, while adapting their defenses to counter every weapon used against them. Dongmin had seen the battle records from the fallen fleets and watched in horror as human plasma cannons became useless after the first few shots, while energy shields were penetrated as if they didn't exist. The Voidborn learned from every engagement and shared that knowledge instantly across their entire force, making conventional warfare not just difficult, but completely impossible. Commander Yoon Ji-hae's escape pod had been recovered 3 hours ago, carrying the only survivor from the Earth Defense Force flagship that had tried to make a final stand at Sol System. Her report confirmed what everyone feared most, that the Voidborn were not random destroyers, but intelligent hunters who targeted command structures and technological centers with surgical precision. The communications array suddenly came alive with emergency broadcasts from across the galaxy as more systems reported Voidborn attacks, while military forces that had seemed invincible just months ago were being systematically destroyed. Navigator Oh Chang-seok plotted escape routes through uncharted space, trying to find paths that might lead away from the advancing enemy, but every direction seemed to lead toward more danger. Sergeant Bae Soo-jin prepared her Marine squads for boarding actions, even though they all knew that close combat with the Voidborn had never ended well for any species that had tried it. The enemy could adapt to personal weapons just as quickly as they countered ship-based systems, turning every firefight into a massacre within minutes of engagement. Pilot Lim Da-yoon ran diagnostics on her fighter squadron, knowing that her small craft might be humanity's only advantage, since they were too small for the Voidborn to easily target and adapt to their tactics. Corpsman Kang Woo-jin worked in the medical bay, treating survivors who spoke of horrors beyond imagination as the Voidborn seemed to study their victims before destroying them. Chief Petty Officer Shin Hae-young maintained order among the crew even as reports continued to arrive of more fallen civilizations, while hope grew thinner with each passing hour. The Indomitable Spirit was humanity's last operational warship, carrying experimental technology that combined human engineering with alien science recovered from previous battles. Dongmin had been given command of this vessel, not because he was the best captain in the fleet, but because he was one of the few willing to take risks that other officers considered insane. His reputation for unconventional tactics and emotional decision-making had been seen as a liability in peacetime, but now those same traits might be humanity's only chance for survival. The ship's experimental systems included adaptive shielding based on Altarian technology and weapons that used Nexus quantum principles, but integrated with human intuition rather than pure logic. So-young had developed new tactical protocols that deliberately included random elements and split-second emotional responses that made human combat patterns harder to predict. Taeho had modified the ship's engines to run on what he called controlled chaos, where human operators made constant adjustments based on instinct rather than computer calculations. Minnie's research into void-born biology suggested that their adaptive abilities came from a hive mind, intelligence that processed information faster than any individual species could think. The bridge fell silent as long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures moving toward their position, while evacuation ships continued to stream away. From the dying station, Hyunwoo's final transmission came through clearly as he reported that Kepler Station's self-destruct sequence was armed and would detonate in 10 minutes to prevent void-born capture. The Admiral's voice carried the weight of defeat as he gave Dongmin new orders that sounded like a death sentence to investigate the void-born source and find some way to stop their advance. Dongmin looked around at his crew, knowing that they were probably the last hope for not just humanity, but every remaining free species in the galaxy. The captain gave the order to set course for the coordinates where long-range probes had detected the largest concentration of void-born activity, while his crew prepared for what might be their final mission. As the indomitable spirit turned away from the dying station and accelerated into the darkness of space, Dongmin wondered if human unpredictability would be enough to succeed where every other civilization had failed. The stars seemed to dim around them as if the universe itself was holding its breath, while the last human warship headed toward an enemy that had never known defeat behind them. Kepler Station erupted in a brilliant flash of light that briefly illuminated the debris field of broken dreams and shattered fleets, while ahead lay only darkness and the unknown. The journey to find answers would take them through uncharted space where no human had ever traveled, and where the very laws of physics seemed to bend under the influence of void-born presence. So Young activated the ship's stealth systems, knowing that their survival depended on staying hidden until they could understand what they were truly facing. The crew worked with quiet determination as they prepared for a mission that would either save the galaxy or add one more ship to the graveyard of civilizations that had dared to challenge the void-born. In the darkness of space, the indomitable spirit disappeared into the void, carrying humanity's last hope toward an encounter that would determine the fate of all life in the galaxy. The neutral zone stretched before them like a graveyard of hopes as the indomitable spirit approached the coordinates where survivors from across the galaxy had gathered in desperate refuge. Commander Yoon Ji-hee sat in the briefing room with haunted eyes that had seen the Earth Defense Force flagship torn apart by weapons that seemed to learn and adapt with each shot fired. Her hands shook slightly as she described how the Voidborn had systematically dismantled every defensive strategy humanity had developed over centuries of warfare, while their own ships grew stronger with each engagement. The data she carried revealed patterns that made Captain Dongmin's worst fears seem optimistic, as the enemy had not just defeated every fleet they encountered but had somehow absorbed their technological essence. Lieutenant Commander So Young studied the tactical reports with growing horror, as she realized that conventional military thinking was not just useless against the Voidborn but actually helped them become more effective. Each weapon fired at them became part of their defensive knowledge, while every tactic used against them was cataloged and countered. Within minutes of first contact, Sergeant Su Jin had joined them from the ruins of the Drakmor warrior clans, and her combat experience provided insights into close-quarters fighting that other species had never considered. The warrior woman described battles where Voidborn forces had adapted to melee weapons and personal armor faster than soldiers could switch tactics, making every engagement a one-sided massacre. Engineer Taeho worked frantically to understand how the enemy could process and integrate technology from dozens of different species while maintaining perfect coordination across vast distances. His analysis suggested that the Voidborn operated as a single massive intelligence rather than individual ships, which explained their ability to share tactical knowledge instantaneously. Navigator Chung Seok had served on merchant vessels throughout the Outer Rim, and his knowledge of uncharted space routes might provide paths that the enemy hadn't yet discovered. The former trader spoke of regions beyond mapped space where strange phenomena occurred, and the normal rules of physics seemed to break down in unpredictable ways. Dr. Minnie's research into captured Voidborn material revealed that their ships were not constructed but grown from some kind of biotechnological hybrid that could reshape itself as needed. The alien tissue samples showed incredible adaptability at the cellular level, with each piece capable of learning and evolving independently, while maintaining connection to the larger organism. Pilot Da Yun reported that her fighter squadrons had achieved limited success against void-born scouts, but only because their small size and erratic flight patterns made them difficult targets. Her experience suggested that unpredictable movement and rapid course changes could delay enemy adaptation long enough to achieve tactical objectives. Corpsman Wu Jin had treated survivors from 17 different species, and his medical data showed that the Voidborn studied their victims before destroying them, as if gathering biological information. The enemy seemed particularly interested in neural patterns and genetic structures, which suggested they were building some kind of comprehensive database of galactic life. Chief He Young maintained discipline among the growing number of refugees who had joined the ship, as word spread that humanity might have found a way to fight back. The veteran petty officer organized work details and training exercises that kept morale up, while everyone waited for their next encounter with an enemy that had never been defeated. Dongmin called a strategy meeting in the main conference room, where representatives from every surviving species gathered to share what they knew about void-born capabilities. The Alterian diplomat spoke of weapons that had worked perfectly in simulations, but failed completely in actual combat, as the enemy adapted faster than targeting computers could lock on a Nexus scientist, explained how their quantum disruptors had been turned against them, with the Voidborn somehow reversing the polarity of quantum fields in real time. During battle, the Drakmor war leader described berserker charges that had broken enemy lines for exactly 37 seconds before the Voidborn learned to predict and counter their assault patterns. Each species had contributed their best military thinking to the collective defense effort, but the enemy had consumed every strategy and made it part of their own tactical knowledge. So Young presented her analysis of human combat patterns and noted that their tendency toward emotional decision-making and split-second improvisation was actually harder to predict than logical tactics. Taeho explained his theory that human technology worked differently because it relied on intuition and experience rather than pure mathematical optimization. Engineer had observed that human-built systems often included redundancies and modifications that made no logical sense but somehow improved performance under stress. Minnie shared her findings about void-born adaptation limits and suggested that they might be vulnerable to completely random actions that followed no discernible pattern. Her research indicated that the enemy intelligence was incredibly sophisticated, but still operated according to certain rules that might be exploited. Chang Seok proposed a course toward the Galactic Rim, where ancient ruins suggested that previous civilizations had encountered similar threats. The navigator had studied star charts that showed patterns of system-wide extinctions occurring in regular cycles. Throughout galactic history, Sujin volunteered to lead boarding parties if they could find a way to get close enough to void-born ships without being immediately destroyed. The sergeant believed that human close combat techniques might be unpredictable, enough to achieve tactical surprise before the enemy could adapt. Yun suggested using her fighters as decoys, while the main ship attempted to gather intelligence about void-born command structures. The pilot had noticed that enemy responses seemed slightly slower when they were forced to track multiple small targets moving in random patterns. Wu Jin provided medical data suggesting that human stress responses and adrenaline production created neurological patterns that might be unique among galactic species. The Corpsman theorized that human irrationality under pressure could be turned into a tactical advantage if properly channeled. He Young reported that crew morale remained high despite the overwhelming odds, because humans seemed to possess an unusual ability to maintain hope in hopeless situations. The chief noted that other species became fatalistic when faced with inevitable defeat, while humans became more determined to fight. Dongmin listened to all the reports and felt the weight of every extinct civilization pressing down on his shoulders as he realized that humanity might be the galaxy's last chance. The captain looked around the room at survivors from dozens of worlds and species who had placed their faith in a single human ship and crew. The meeting concluded with orders to set course for the coordinates where deep space probes had detected the largest concentration of void-born activity. Long-range sensors showed a massive construct in dark space that appeared to be built from the hulks of destroyed fleets representing every major civilization in the galaxy. The structure pulsed with energy signatures from technologies that should not have been compatible, but had somehow been integrated into a single massive entity. Dong Min realized they were not just facing an invasion fleet, but looking at the accumulated military might of every species the Voidborn had conquered. The enemy had not simply destroyed their opponents, but had harvested their knowledge and capabilities to create something far more powerful than any individual civilization. As the indomitable spirit prepared to depart the neutral zone, the captain wondered if human unpredictability would be enough to overcome an enemy that had absorbed the best tactical thinking from across the galaxy. The stars seemed to whisper warnings as they accelerated toward coordinates that might contain either salvation or the final resting place of the last free beings in the universe. Behind them, the gathered survivors watched their only hope disappear into the darkness, while ahead lay a construct that represented the graveyard of 1,000 civilizations. The darkness of uncharted space wrapped around the indomitable spirit like a living thing, as navigator Chang Xiao guided them through regions where no human had ever traveled. Strange energy readings flickered on the sensors, while space itself seemed to ripple and bend in ways that violated everything the crew knew about physics. Captain Dongmin stood on the bridge watching the viewscreen display phenomena that made his mind struggle to process what he was seeing as reality itself appeared to be breaking down. Lieutenant Commander So Young reported that their instruments were detecting gravitational waves that formed impossible patterns, while electromagnetic readings showed spectrums that shouldn't exist. The closer they came to the coordinates, the more unstable space became, with regions where time seemed to move differently, and light bent at angles that created optical illusions. Engineer Tai Ho worked desperately to keep their systems functioning as the ship's computers struggled to make sense of sensor data that contradicted fundamental laws of nature. Dr. Minne studied readings that suggested they were approaching something that existed partially outside normal spacetime, which might explain the Voidborn's seemingly impossible abilities. The construct appeared on long-range sensors as a massive structure the size of a small moon that pulsed with energy, signatures from every known civilization in the galaxy. Sergeant Su Jin prepared her Marines for whatever they might encounter, while knowing that conventional tactics would be useless against an enemy that had absorbed the combat knowledge of 1,000 species. Pilot Dayun ran pre-flight checks on her fighters, even though they all knew that launching into the distorted space around the construct would be nearly suicidal. The structure grew larger on their screens, revealing itself to be built from the recognizable hulls of ships from dozens of different civilizations, all fused together into a single massive entity. Pieces of Alterian golden vessels were melded with the dark metal of Drakmor warships, while sections of Nexus technology pulsed with quantum energy throughout the construct. Corpsman Wu Jin monitored the crew's vital signs as exposure to the strange energies around them began affecting human biology in ways that medical scanners couldn't fully explain. Chief He Young maintained order on the ship as crew members reported strange dreams and visions that seemed to come from outside their own minds. The construct was not just a collection of defeated ships, but appeared to be a living entity that had grown by consuming and integrating everything it encountered. Dongmin ordered the ship to yellow alert as they detected movement within the structure, with sections shifting and reconfiguring themselves, as if responding to their presence. The first Voidborn scouts appeared as dark shapes that moved through space without visible propulsion systems, while their hulls rippled with adaptive modifications. So Young activated the Chaos Protocol she had developed, which included random maneuvers and contradictory tactical decisions designed to confuse enemy adaptation systems. The lead scout vessel opened fire with weapons that seemed to combine human plasma technology with Alterian energy beams and Nexus quantum disruptors all at once. Teho rerouted power through systems that had been modified to include human intuition as a variable, making their responses unpredictable even to their own computers. The indomitable spirit returned fire, with weapons that deliberately included random elements and targeting patterns that changed based on crew emotions, rather than tactical logic. The enemy scout began adapting to their weapons but struggled with the chaotic nature of human responses that included split-second decisions based on instinct rather than strategy. Dayun launched her fighters with orders to fly in patterns that made no tactical sense while avoiding any predictable formations or coordinated attacks. The small craft moved like a school of fish through space, with each pilot making individual decisions that created an overall pattern too complex for the enemy to analyze quickly. Min-A monitored the Voidborn responses and noted that their adaptation time increased significantly when faced with actions that seemed to serve no logical purpose. The enemy ships began reconfiguring their weapons and defenses, but their changes lagged behind human modifications that were made for emotional rather than strategic reasons. Sujin's Marines prepared for possible boarding action, using equipment that had been deliberately modified in ways that served no apparent function except to confuse enemy scanners. The sergeant had learned from survivor reports that Voidborn forces expected logical tactical responses and struggled when faced with actions that seemed completely irrational. Wu Jin discovered that human stress hormones were creating neurological patterns that the enemy couldn't scan or predict, which gave them a biological advantage. The corpsmen realized that human irrationality might be their greatest weapon against an opponent that relied on logical analysis of enemy behavior. Chang Seok plotted course changes that followed no navigational logic while using human intuition to avoid dangers that sensors couldn't detect. The navigators' seemingly random decisions kept them ahead of enemy targeting systems that were designed to predict rational pilot behavior. Hae-Young coordinated crew responses that deliberately included contradictory orders and emotional outbursts that created chaos the Voidborn couldn't process. The chief petty officer had learned that organized confusion was more effective than disciplined tactics against an enemy that expected military precision. The battle continued around the massive construct as more Voidborn vessels emerged from docking bays that had been carved from the hulls of defeated warships. Each enemy ship was unique and appeared to combine technologies from multiple civilizations in ways that should have been impossible, but somehow worked perfectly. Dongmin realized they were not just fighting individual vessels, but engaging with manifestations of the construct's central intelligence that controlled everything simultaneously. The captain made tactical decisions based on gut instinct rather than training, while his crew responded with emotional reactions instead of programmed responses. Their chaotic fighting style began to show results as Voidborn ships struggled to adapt to tactics that seemed to change moment by moment without any discernible pattern. So Young noticed that enemy adaptation rates slowed dramatically when human responses included what appeared to be mistakes or tactical errors. The Voidborn intelligence seemed unable to distinguish between genuine mistakes and deliberately irrational decisions, which created gaps in their defensive calculations. Tae-Ho overloaded systems in ways that should have caused critical failures but somehow increased performance through what he called creative destruction. The engineers' modifications included feedback loops that made their weapons more powerful by introducing controlled instabilities that the enemy couldn't predict. The construct itself began to respond to their presence with sections reconfiguring to track their movements, while energy patterns shifted to match their tactical innovations. Daeyoon's fighters discovered that the structure's defensive systems were designed to counter coordinated attacks but struggled with individual pilots acting on pure instinct. The pilots began achieving penetration of the construct's outer defenses by flying in ways that violated basic flight safety while trusting their reflexes over instruments. Min-A's scans revealed that the construct was more than a mobile base, but appeared to be a massive processing center where the intelligence of defeated civilizations was stored and analyzed. The structure contained vast databases of tactical knowledge from every species it had conquered, but seemed to lack understanding of truly chaotic behavior. Sujin led the first successful boarding action in galactic history, as her Marines used tactics that combined elements from every combat doctrine while following no single strategy. The boarding teams moved through the construct's corridors using intuition and emotional responses to navigate spaces that seemed to shift and change around them. As they penetrated deeper into the structure, the crew discovered that they were inside something that was part ship, part organism, and part massive computational matrix. The construct's interior revealed chambers containing the technological essence of every defeated civilization, while organic components processed and integrated new tactical data. Dongmin realized they had found the source of Voidborn power, but also understood that destroying it would require tactics that no logical military mind could conceive. The captain looked at his crew and knew that their greatest strength was not their weapons or technology, but their uniquely human ability to embrace chaos as a tactical advantage. Captain Dongmin stood before his assembled crew in the main briefing room, knowing that the words he was about to speak would either doom them all or give the galaxy its only chance for survival. The massive void-born construct loomed on the view screen, behind him pulsing with the combined technological might of every civilization that had ever dared to challenge the dark intelligence within. Lieutenant Commander So Young had finished her tactical analysis, and the results were clear that any conventional assault on the structure would end in defeat within minutes. Engineer Taeho presented his findings about the construct's adaptive systems and explained that normal weapons would only make the enemy stronger by adding human technology to their collection. Dr. Minnie shared her discovery that the structure was not just a ship or base, but a massive organic brain that processed and stored the tactical knowledge of every species it had conquered. The construct had become so perfect at warfare through accumulated experience that it could predict and counter any logical military strategy before the first shot was fired. Sergeant Sujin reported back from her reconnaissance missions into the structure's outer sections, where her Marines had discovered chambers containing replicas of their own equipment and tactics. The enemy had been studying them since their first encounter and was already preparing countermeasures for every weapon and strategy the indomitable spirit possessed. Pilot Da-un described how the construct's defensive systems had adapted to her fighter squadrons, forcing her pilots to completely abandon flight manuals and operate on pure instinct. Navigator Chang Seok revealed his analysis of the structure's internal layout, which appeared to shift and reconfigure itself, making traditional mapping impossible. Corpsman Wu Jin presented medical data showing that prolonged exposure to the construct was affecting human brain chemistry in ways that might either kill them or give them an advantage. Chief Hae Young reported that crew morale remained surprisingly high despite the impossible odds, because humans seemed to thrive when facing insurmountable challenges. Dongmin looked at the faces around him and made the decision that would either save the galaxy or add one more failure to the construct's collection of defeated enemies. The captain announced that they would not attempt to escape or call for backup that didn't exist, but would instead try to destroy the entire construct from within. The plan required getting inside the structure and targeting its central processing core, which meant a suicide mission by any reasonable calculation. Taeho explained his theory that the construct's adaptive systems could be overloaded by introducing chaos directly into its computational matrix. The engineer proposed jury-rigging their systems to create feedback loops that would make the enemy's own adaptive abilities work against it. So Young developed the Last Stand protocol, which abandoned every rule of military engagement and instead relied on pure human stubbornness and emotional decision-making. The protocol required simultaneous attacks using completely different tactical approaches that should have resulted in disaster but might create patterns the enemy couldn't decode. Minnie discovered that the construct's core was located at the center of the structure, surrounded by layers of organic computing tissue that processed tactical data. The xenobiologist realized that the brain-like organ was so sophisticated that it had transcended logical thought and could no longer comprehend genuine randomness. Sujin volunteered to lead multiple boarding teams deep into the construct, using tactics that combined elements from every combat doctrine while following no single strategy. The sergeant proposed that her Marines would move through the structure like individual fighters rather than coordinated units, making their actions impossible to predict. Daeun outlined a flight plan that required her pilots to ignore every safety protocol and fly based on emotional responses rather than instrument readings. The ace pilot understood that only by abandoning logic completely could they hope to penetrate defenses designed to counter rational tactical thinking. Chang Seok plotted navigation routes through the construct that made no sense geometrically, but followed human intuition about spatial relationships. The navigator had learned that the structure's interior followed rules that human minds could grasp through instinct, even when instruments failed to provide guidance. Wu Jin prepared medical stations throughout the ship, knowing that their assault would push human physiology beyond safe limits. Corpsman had discovered that extreme stress actually improved human performance in ways that alien biologies couldn't match or understand. Hae Young organized the crew into teams that would operate independently without communication or coordination, relying on shared human instincts. The chief petty officer realized that organized chaos was humanity's greatest tactical advantage against an enemy that expected military discipline. The assault began with the indomitable spirit diving directly into the construct's superstructure, while launching fighters in every direction. Without any coordinated plan, Tae-ho initiated cascade failures throughout their own systems, creating controlled explosions that somehow increased power output to impossible levels. So Young issued contradictory orders to different sections of the ship while making tactical decisions based on her emotional state rather than strategic analysis. The crew responded to the chaos with human adaptability, turning every malfunction into an improvised weapon and every mistake into a tactical opportunity. Sujin's Marines penetrated deeper into the construct than any boarding party in galactic history by moving like individual predators rather than organized soldiers. Each Marine followed personal instincts through corridors that shifted around them, while the construct's defenses struggled to track dozens of independent threats. Daeyoon's fighters achieved impossible maneuvers by abandoning flight computers and trusting reflexes that had been honed by millions of years of human evolution. The pilots flew through the construct's interior spaces, using spatial awareness that operated below conscious thought, while their erratic patterns confused targeting systems. Construct began to respond erratically, as its adaptive systems encountered tactical patterns that made no mathematical sense, but somehow achieved military objectives. Min-ae monitored the enemy's responses and noted increasing instability in the central processing core as it tried to analyze human behavior that defied logical categorization. Chang Seok navigated through sections of the structure that existed in folded space by using human intuition to find paths that instruments claimed were impossible. The navigator discovered that human spatial reasoning could function in environments where normal physics broke down completely. Wu Jin treated wounded crew members while noting that human pain responses were actually improving combat effectiveness by triggering neurological changes. The corpsman realized that humans fought better when injured because suffering activated survival instincts that transcended rational thought. Dong Min coordinated the assault by making decisions that contradicted everything he had learned in command school, while trusting gut instincts over tactical doctrine. The captain discovered that leadership in chaos required emotional intelligence rather than strategic planning as his crew responded to feelings rather than orders. The construct's core chamber was finally breached by Sujin's Marines, who found themselves face-to-face with an organic computer the size of a city block. The massive brain pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of every defeated civilization while processing tactical data faster than any individual species could think. Hae Young coordinated the final assault teams, knowing that their success depended on maintaining human chaos in the face of perfect alien logic. The crew prepared for the ultimate confrontation, where the fate of every remaining free being in the galaxy would be decided by humanity's refusal to accept inevitable defeat. The heart of the voidborn construct pulsed around Captain Dongmin and his crew like the beating of some massive alien god as they stood before the central intelligence that had consumed 1,000 civilizations. The organic computers stretched before them in chambers that defied comprehension with neural networks, the size of starships processing tactical data from every defeated species in galactic history. Sergeant Sujin's Marines had split into dozens of individual teams moving through the brain-like structure using instincts rather than coordination. While each soldier followed personal hunches about which paths to take, Lieutenant Commander So Young abandoned her tactical station and began issuing orders based on emotional impulses, rather than strategic thinking, while the crew responded with human intuition instead of military discipline. Engineer Tae-ho worked frantically to overload the construct's adaptive systems by creating feedback loops that made their own technology fight against itself in ways that should have been catastrophic, but somehow increased their effectiveness. The massive intelligence began to respond erratically as its perfect logical systems encountered human behavior that followed no discernible patterns while still achieving tactical objectives. Dr. Min-ae monitored the construct's core functions and watched in amazement as the accumulated wisdom of entire civilizations struggled to comprehend actions that made no mathematical sense. The alien brain had absorbed the tactical knowledge of every species that had ever faced the Voidborn, but none of those civilizations had possessed humanity's unique gift for creative chaos. Pilot Da-Yun flew her fighter directly into the construct's neural pathways, using reflexes that operated below conscious thought while her squadron followed no formation or plan. The pilots trusted their instincts completely as they navigated through organic corridors that pulsed with bioelectrical energy, while their erratic flight patterns confused defensive systems, designed to counter logical tactics. Navigator Chang Xiok guided teams through sections of the construct that existed in folded dimensions by using human spatial intuition that functioned even when instruments failed completely. Corpsman Wu Jin treated wounded crew members while noting that human pain responses were actually triggering neurological changes that improved combat performance beyond normal biological limits. Chief He Young coordinated multiple assault teams without any central planning by relying on shared human instincts that allowed the crew to work together. Despite complete chaos, the construct's defenses began to malfunction as adaptive systems that had been designed to counter logical military strategies encountered human unpredictability that defied analysis. Su Jin led her Marines deeper into the central processing core, where massive neural clusters processed the tactical experiences of defeated civilizations. Each Marine moved independently through the organic
maze following personal instincts while the construct's immune system struggled to target threats that behaved like individual predators rather than organized soldiers. The alien intelligence attempted to create countermeasures by analyzing human
behavior patterns but found that every response triggered new chaotic actions that followed no predictable rules. So Young coordinated the final assault by abandoning all communication protocols and instead relying on emotional connections between crew members who had learned to think as one chaotic entity. Taeho initiated the cascade overload sequence that would either destroy the construct or kill them all, while his jury-rigged systems created controlled explosions throughout the neural networks. The engineer had discovered that human technology worked differently because it included intuitive modifications that made no logical sense, but somehow improved performance under extreme stress. Dae-Yoon's fighters penetrated the deepest levels of the construct by flying in formations that violated every principle of aerodynamics, while trusting reflexes that had evolved over millions of years. The pilots achieved impossible maneuvers through organic passages that shifted around them, while their chaotic flight patterns created disruptions in the construct's bioelectrical systems. Many realized that the construct's greatest strength was also its fatal weakness, as the accumulated tactical knowledge of defeated civilizations had made it incapable of understanding genuine randomness. The alien intelligence had become so perfect at logical warfare that it could no longer comprehend the beautiful chaos of human nature. Chang Xiok navigated through the construct's core, using spatial awareness that functioned in dimensions where normal geometry broke down, while following paths that existed only in human imagination. The navigator discovered that the most direct route to their target was through sections that instruments claimed were impossible to reach. Wu Jin coordinated medical support for assault teams while noting that humans seemed to fight more effectively when pushed beyond their physical and mental limits. The corpsman realized that human survival instincts operated on levels that transcended rational thought while creating neurological states that enhanced combat performance. Dongmin faced the construct's central intelligence in a chamber where reality itself seemed fluid, while the alien mind tried desperately to understand why humans refused to accept logical defeat. The captain made the final tactical decision, based on pure human stubbornness rather than any strategic calculation, while his crew prepared for actions that would either save the galaxy or destroy them all. He Young maintained crew cohesion through the chaos by appealing to shared human values rather than military discipline, while each team member contributed to the assault in uniquely personal ways. The construct's core began to destabilize as its adaptive systems encountered the ultimate human paradox, that victory could be achieved through actions that guaranteed tactical failure. Su Jin's Marines reached the central processing unit and began their assault, using weapons and tactics that combined elements from every combat doctrine. While following no single strategy, the soldiers fought with emotional intensity rather than professional detachment, while their unpredictable actions created cascade failures throughout the construct's neural networks. So Young coordinated the final phase of the attack by making decisions that contradicted her own previous orders, while the crew responded with adaptability that confused enemy countermeasures. Tae-ho achieved the impossible by creating a feedback loop that made the construct's own adaptive abilities work against its central intelligence, while human chaos infected its logical processes. The engineer realized that humans had always been the galaxy's most effective weapon against perfect order, because they possessed the ability to find victory in apparent defeat. Da-Yun led her pilots in the final assault run through the construct's collapsing core, while flying maneuvers that should have killed them but somehow achieved their tactical objectives. The fighters became extensions of human will rather than mere machines as pilots and aircraft merged into chaotic entities that defied every law of physics and tactics. The construct's intelligence faced the ultimate human truth that some battles could only be won by those who refused to accept the mathematical certainty of defeat. Many watched as the alien brain struggled to process the concept that logical perfection could be overcome by emotional determination backed by nothing more than stubborn human hope. Chang Seok navigated the crew through the construct's death throes, while using intuition that operated beyond conscious thought to find escape routes that shouldn't have existed. The navigator discovered that humans could find their way out of impossible situations by trusting instincts that had been developed through millions of years of survival against overwhelming odds. Wu Jin treated casualties, while noting that the human ability to keep fighting beyond logical limits was creating neurological patterns that the construct couldn't analyze or counter. The corpsmen realized that humanity's greatest tactical advantage was their refusal to acknowledge when they were beaten. Dongmin gave the final order to abandon the dying construct, while his crew executed an escape that relied on pure human determination rather than any rational plan. The captain understood that they had won not through superior technology or strategy, but through humanity's unique gift for finding hope in hopeless situations. The indomitable spirit emerged from the collapsing construct as the massive structure began to tear itself apart, while its accumulated knowledge of perfect warfare proved useless against imperfect human chaos. Behind them, the graveyard of 1,000 civilizations died in brilliant explosions, while ahead lay the stars, and the promise that the galaxy would remain free news of the impossible. Victory spread across space faster than light as surviving species learned that the Voidborn had finally met an enemy they couldn't adapt to or defeat. The human crew looked back at the dying construct and understood that their greatest strength had always been their willingness to embrace chaos as a tactical philosophy.